the same college for a couple of years. If I remember, it was ancient Indian history and constitution, I suppose, constitution of India. And subsequently, like many of us, he also joined the Indian Administrative Service. Wajahat is younger to me, but he is the same batch as mine. And of course, you all know about his very, very distinguished career. After doing many important assignments in Jammu and Kashmir, he became the commissioner of Srinagar district, Srinagar region, which had 9 districts. And unfortunately, while he was negotiating with the militants involved in the Hazrat Bal incident, he met with a near fatal accident. And of course, he had to be carried to Delhi, and he was treated, and he was unwell for a fairly long time. He thereafter went to Washington, and not only was Minister Community Affairs, but also looked after education. And of course, then joined USIP as a scholar. So he has a very, very strong academic credentials. And after, of course, his retirement, doing several stints as secretaries in different ministries, Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Ministry of Textiles, and Ministry of Panchayat Raj, which I presume was very close to his heart, because he had also worked with Mr. Rajiv Gandhi while he was the Prime Minister. And Mr. Rajiv Gandhi had been a great advocate of decentralization. Thereafter, he became Chief Information Commissioner, and he was the first Chief Information Commissioner of India, and did a tremendous amount of work, some pioneering work. He also pronounced some landmark judgments as the Chief Information Commissioner. And thereafter, of course, he's been appointed the chairman of the National Minorities Commission, and I have no doubt that his tenure will see many important achievements and redressal of many problems that the community faces. Of course, as I said, he is also a scholar in his own right. He's published a number of books, mostly on Kashmir. And there is a recent book that you must have all seen or will see about Kashmir and also its future. And we are all looking forward to hearing him. May I also request Wajahat, after you finish, you say a few things about the Right to Information Act, if there is time. We have a few questions that you might wish to address.
That also has something to do with this as well.
Okay, that's it. So, a very warm welcome to you, Mr. Habibullah, Wajahat, and we are all looking forward keenly to your observations and your remarks. Thank you for coming to IDSA.
Introduce the audience here as well with generals and policymakers, scholars and journalists. It is a very informed house, and we look forward to your participation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our guest speaker, Mr. Wajahat Habibullah.
Thank you, Narendra, and thank you for your introduction. I'm somewhat overwhelmed by the audience, and I hope I'll be able to tell you something that you may not have known or may not have sensed in order to contribute to the ongoing discussions on an issue which, of course, concerns the whole country, though it may be in one part. I have tried to present this as a small background presentation, and I would really welcome a discussion after that, because there are so many issues which have of recent time come up, and I can, of course, probably you'll know the answers better than I do, but I can also contribute what little I might from having my own experience and my own contacts in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So to start with, a little bit about the background. I've titled this Problem and Its Resolution, a resolution which I hope is not only possible but also imminent, provided that we are in fact able to do what we must do. And I will try to show how opportunities have presented themselves in the past, bright opportunities we have unfortunately missed. So I'll go on from there. This is, of course, just a map. Most of you don't need to see this at all. This is the layout of population. As you can see, the population is concentrated in Kashmir, which is also the smallest, physically the smallest region.
Just turn it towards you.
Will it turn? Which is, or stand this way, I suppose. Which is also the smallest regionally in terms of area. The origins of the whole thing, of course, started with India's independence, accession, and a war, which followed immediately thereafter in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. It started, of course, with the release of Sheikh Abdullah, September 1947. And why I mention this is because in his speech in Huzuri Bagh, which is now called Iqbal Park, on the 29th of September 1947, immediately on his release, he made it quite clear that his objective was that Kashmir should be a part of India. Then there was this uprising of the decommissioned 6th Punjab in Poonch, followed immediately thereafter by invading Afridi and Mahsood tribesmen, and the fall of Domel, the border town of Jammu and Kashmir, in October 22nd, 1947. This, of course, brought India into war with Pakistan. Then this was followed, of course, immediately thereafter with the accession, the UN resolution of August 13, 1948, which laid down that it would be demilitarized, the area of Jammu and Kashmir would be demilitarized, and this would be followed by a plebiscite between India and Pakistan. There was no third option. There was only India and Pakistan, and this led, of course, to the establishment of the UN Commission on the state of Jammu and Kashmir. But this question, which was raised in 1948 of a plebiscite, this is an assessment of a leading columnist in India who is also a person who is very sympathetic to the people of Jammu and Kashmir and has been visiting that state, with which I would agree. The concept of plebiscite is dead as a dodo, but popular alienation is greater than it was 50 years ago. The people's rejection of the Union of India is palpable. This is, in fact, the challenge. I've tried to pose the problem in terms of what an Englishman, Alexander Evans, has written in the Washington Quarterly. The first part deals with the question of whether it is to be given to India or Pakistan, become India independent or be repartitioned. These are the arguments that have been going on round and round. But what he has assessed, and what I wish to highlight, is the second problem is far more complicated, interesting and pressing: the problem of Kashmiris themselves. How do Kashmiris get the government they want? The origins of the militancy that has since 1988 claimed more than 35,000 lives lie here. Yet this can be the only source of enduring solution. That is, in fact, also what I wish to put before you. That is the Kashmiri people who finally hold the answer. Now, the 70s were a time of great promise. I had mentioned to you to start with that there were opportunities that we had received in the past. one such opportunity was certainly there in the 70s. There was war between India and Pakistan in December 1971, which led to the rout of the Pakistani army in what is now Bangladesh, followed by the Shimla Treaty of June 1972. And although it is often said that, well, there were some clauses that should have been there and which had been agreed to between Bhutto and Indra Gandhi, and you will know of that debate. I don't have to dwell on it. The fact is that in that treaty, it was agreed by both India and Pakistan, this is in writing, that the issue of Kashmir was a dispute, because it says that all matters between India and Pakistan, including Jammu and Kashmir, which obviously means that India had conceded something that our Ministry of External Affairs has been loath to do thereafter, that there was a dispute. But Pakistan had conceded that this was no longer a matter to be settled by the UN. It was a matter to be settled between India and Pakistan. Again, a matter from which they reneged, and for years thereafter they kept saying, no, UN resolution, UN resolution, UN resolution. But juridically, if not judicially, this was, in fact, the pathway to a solution. And this was sensed by the Kashmiri leadership, because it was followed shortly thereafter by the Sheikh Indra Accord, which of course immediately thereafter the what were called the Beg Parthasarthi talks continued, and in 1975 they came to an accord, which in fact from the side of the Plebiscite Front, which is the largest dissenting organization in the Union of India, the political party which still had the largest following in the state, this party then conceded. It accepted the Constitution of Jammu and Kashmir in 1956, which in fact accepted the union with India, the accession to India, constitutionally, legally, in every way. And this did the Sheikh Indra Accord, which is often something which is often not spoken about, because really nothing very much materialized. It gave the state government, the new state government, headed by Sheikh Abdullah, the authority to review all the laws that had been extended to the state of Jammu and Kashmir after 1953, when he was actually deposed or overthrown, or whatever you'd like to call it. But the fact is, and I have spoken to Mirza Afzal Beg on this, who was in fact the legal advisor to Sheikh Abdullah, and he said, ye to sare main dekh raha hu, isme kaun sa hum nikale? Do we not want to have an election commission over here? Who are we going to appoint as the election commission if you don't have the election commission of India? Where will we get a Supreme Court if we don't have a Supreme Court? So all these laws which had been extended to the state of Jammu and Kashmir after the overthrow of Sheikh Abdullah were in fact laws which he himself conceded were laws that were needed by the state. Thereafter, the Sheikh, in fact, during his regime, passed the Public Security Act, which went much further than Tada or Epota, any of these laws. It was much more severe, and it is still in operation. He, of course, also used his facility to pass the Permanent Resettlement Act, which allowed for those who had gone to Pakistan in 1947-48 to actually come back and resettle in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And this, in fact, has constitutional authority. And although this act was challenged in the Supreme Court of India, the Supreme Court of India said it had nothing to say about it. So, in fact, that law still subsists, but has never really been enforced by the government of J&K. Then you had the State Assembly election of October 1977, of which, of course, I have first-hand knowledge because I was Deputy Commissioner, Srinagar. And as the election came closer and closer to the time of polling, I received round abuse from every political party. This Beg Sahab, speaking at the Gandhi Maidan, which is now where the High Court is now located, said that when we had agreed to having this man as the Deputy Commissioner of Srinagar, I'd been Deputy Commissioner of Poonch before that, and I was brought there just after the governor's rule was announced. He said we had agreed to him because we thought he was honest, but unfortunately he has turned out to be as much of a rascal as any of the others. Mirwais Farooq was equally critical. When the election results, when the election counting was actually taking place, when the elections were actually being conducted, when the voting was actually being cast, my friend young Farooq Abdullah, in those days young, of course not so young now, but young Farooq Abdullah in those days went up to the IG Kashmir, the senior most police officer then was the IG, Peer Ghulam Hassan Shah, and saying that there's theft everywhere. All our voting has been stolen. We are not going to be able to win because there is widespread theft of the ballot boxes. And this deputy commissioner is worth nothing at all. In fact, when the results came out, then the protests also stopped, and I think it was agreed thereafter that that was one of the fairest elections that they'd ever had. But given that, then this was followed by the execution of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in Pakistan, and he had been a very popular figure inside the state of Jammu and Kashmir, particularly in Kashmir. He would come out every time they had an event like the date of martyrdom, when the National Conference workers had been shot down by the Maharaja and so on. He'd come out and give a speech, a rousing speech. You know, he was very good at that kind of thing, a rabble-rousing speech. And of course, the Kashmiris had never been exposed to the darker side of his governance. The only exposure they had to him was those rabble-rousing speeches, and he was very, very popular. So when he was executed in the manner that he was, there was a general revulsion for Pakistan in the valley, and this was focused actually on the Jamaat Islami. The Jamaat Islami was virtually decimated, to the extent that people sporting beards were caught hold of in the streets and said, Jamaat Islami ke ho? Their orchards were felled or set on fire. They were attacked physically. I've also been told many years later by some people that some were also killed, but that is, I don't believe that is true, because I was Deputy Commissioner of Srinagar and I heard of not a single death at that time as a result of this. But certainly, there was a march to the line of control by the public, who then accosted the BSF picket and told them, if you are not able to go across, let us go across and fight. Now that was something unprecedented in Kashmir, and so it marked probably the lowest point in Pakistan's standing in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, but we were unable to take advantage of it. We were unable to take advantage of it, and I believe, and I mentioned that in my book, this Tariq Ali asked Mrs. Gandhi about it, and she said if there was any opportunity to actually go ahead with actually holding a plebiscite, that was the opportunity. So he said, then why wasn't it held? So she said, because I was not the Prime Minister. Nevertheless, this was an opportunity which we lost, and how we lost it was what happened in the 1980s. You had the State Assembly elections of 1983, again, perfectly fair, perfectly free, but then the ouster of an elected government in July 1984 through means which were, although probably legally sound, were not really ethically so. Then you had the Raji Farooq Accord of 1986. Now the Raji Farooq Accord, I had something to do with that, because I was at that time in the Prime Minister's office, and I've tried to describe it in some detail in my work as to what went into it. It was not simply a political accord. It was an accord for the development, economic and social development of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. It had a very strong economic feature, and this really was as a result, because you know that Rajiv had signed a number of accords in different areas where there had been disruptions. The Rajiv Longowal Accord, the Mizoram Accord, a number of them, including the very unhappy Sri Lanka Accord. But most of these had only a political content and not an economic content, and learning from that, we had therefore sought to build an economic content in this. And Farooq had said that while he had entered into this accord, he realized it as a political risk, But he entered into this accord so that at the end of his term, he could have gone back to the people and said, okay, you may say that I had capitulated to the government of India, but look what I've got for you. Unfortunately, it didn't work that way. The economic development that was anticipated didn't come about as a result of that. And so you had the defeat of the central government in the elections of 1989, followed shortly thereafter by the fall of the Farooq Abdullah government. And therefore, this 1986 accord and the elections that followed it in 1987 are looked upon as a capitulation by the Kashmiris and a surrender by Farooq Abdullah. This has always been the sensitive point. When I go back and keep repeating in my work and here also to the question of the public perception, that is what I mean. This was not a capitulation. This was an effort at winning something from the government of India. Quick disposal of development plans and programs for the state of Jammu and Kashmir, because I was nominated in the Prime Minister's office as a person who would personally service all proposals that came from Jammu and Kashmir and see that they were quickly passed. So all these things were there. But unfortunately, the public saw it as a capitulation because from the beginning, the cause for the accession of the state of Jammu and Kashmir to India lay soundly in the fact that the Sheikh was at the time convinced that the only safeguard of the ethnic and cultural identity of the Kashmiris would be through a union with India. And he's mentioned this also to Josef Korbel in his discussions. Josef Korbel, as you know, was the head of the UN Commission on India and Pakistan. And he mentioned specifically to him as to why it was necessary for the state to be part of India. He mentioned that it could have gone either to India or to Pakistan. Had it gone to Pakistan, its identity would have been subsumed. Had it been independent, no country would allow it to be independent at that time. He said it might have been the best solution, but it would not have never have been allowed by the countries surrounding it. And therefore, the only solution, in those days he used the word partition, because there was a certain portion of the state of Jammu and Kashmir which was very supportive of Pakistan and is in fact now part of Pakistan. In fact, that was the region, what is known as Azad Kashmir, which was in fact supportive of the Muslim Conference, which itself had been supportive of Pakistan, but not this side. This side had solidly backed Sheikh Abdullah, whose program was for union with India. But that had a purpose. And that purpose was conserving and subserving the identity of the Kashmiris, for which his whole movement against the Maharajas had fought. Now, having said that, his accord with Indra Gandhi in 1975, this accord between Rajiv and Farooq, these have been looked upon as capitulations. What it has made difficult is that there is now no leader, no single leader in the state of Jammu and Kashmir who can actually claim to speak for the people of Kashmir, nor will they accept something that has been actually negotiated between one leader or even two or three leaders with the government of India and the government of Pakistan. So that is what I feel has to be done. It has to come from among the people themselves. How we will do that is what I have tried to address. Then, of course, you had the outbreak of insurgency, the firing in Gaukadal, and so forth. Now, the causes. I mentioned to you that the objectives, both of the Indra Sheikh Accord, of allowing the state to assert its autonomy within the Indian Union through the review of the laws, was not found practicable or even legally sound by the leadership of Jammu and Kashmir. In 1986, they felt that, again, the National Conference leadership, which they had elected to power, had betrayed them, and reneged on its promises. What was happening was, in the meantime, you'd had the 1987 election, in which, unfortunately, there had been certain cases of malfeasance and rigging of election. And this has been widely written about. I don't have to really go into it. I will not agree that the entire election was a rigged election. But there were certain seats, and unfortunately very high profile seats, where this cannot be doubted. But the governor of the state went ahead and actually said that those elections were rigged and dismissed the entire assembly in 1989. This, in fact, confirmed in the people's minds that they were being denied democracy. And from this, by this time, Pakistani elements, the ISI particularly, had become very, very active. By this time also, the Jamaat Islami, which had been a surrogate virtually of Pakistan, functioning in that state for many years, had come completely back to life. It had again become a powerful entity. The reasons for that and things I've tried to deal with in my book, I won't go into that now, but they had become a powerful entity. They had been buttressed. In the 1980s, you will remember what happened in Assam with the Bengalis, the Bengali Muslims, Bangladeshi Muslims in Assam. A number of them, after the uprising, after the disturbances in Bangladesh, had actually moved from there and had come and started manning the madrasas in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So these young people who had tasted of democracy with elections in 1977, elections in 1983, in which they'd found their own state party defeating the national parties. In the first case, the Janta Party. In the second case, the Congress Party, led by the powerful and Mrs. Gandhi herself, who had actually personally campaigned in the election, suddenly found that this was not so, that they were being denied democracy. And the conclusion to which they came, garnished by all these other elements which I mentioned, was that they were never going to have real democracy in the state of Jammu and Kashmir unless they agreed to have a leadership which was acceptable to the government of India. They were never to really be a free people. Then, of course, there were many other causes. There was high rates of unemployment. As I said, the money that was coming in was not really producing the desired results. It was being announced that these are the schemes and that is being done, but the results were not there to be seen. There was widespread favoritism, nepotism inside the government, corruption, which has been a characteristic of that government for many, many years, the government of J&K, the bureaucracy there. All these fed into that feeling that their future did not lie with India. At the same time, there were people going across, being encouraged to go across, receiving training, coming back. The training that they received was really very desultory. I don't think they were really trained very professionally, but they came back with the certainty that now they would be able to overthrow the government of India. After all, their colleagues in Afghanistan had overthrown the world's mightiest army, which was the Soviet Union. So from this came the rebirth of the concept of Azadi. Now this is a rebirth, I say, because this concept really sprang from the concept of Naya Kashmir of Sheikh Abdullah, announced by him in 1941 in his campaign against the Maharaja. And the manifesto and the agenda of the JKLF to this day remains Naya Kashmir. And their belief in 1989 was that the Sheikh had betrayed his own manifesto of Naya Kashmir, and therefore the principal target of attack after the outbreak of insurgency in 1989-90 was in fact the grave of Sheikh Abdullah himself, which had to be protected specially for many years. But I mentioned this word because in fact this word has now become of importance. It's a subject of debate. If that is what the Kashmiris want, then should they be allowed to talk about it? I'll come to that when I talk about possible resolution. Then there are social remedies. As I mentioned to you, at that time there were heavy corruption, nepotism, and so forth, and in their society it had become a corrupt society. Unfortunately, what had happened was that the middle class elite inside the state of Jammu and Kashmir, particularly in Kashmir, the very class that supported Bakhshi Ghulam Muhammad was in fact the very class which had opposed Sheikh Abdullah in his bid to come closer to the Union of India. Their sympathies had lain with the Muslim Conference. It's a characteristic of middle classes that they tend to gravitate towards the more right-wing parties, and therefore their sympathies lay with the Muslim League and therefore Pakistan. But because, having acceded to India, they found themselves head of a ruling elite which was in a position to actually repeatedly regain power because it had the support of the government of India, because it gave its support to the government of India in exchange for that. That was the very group of people through whom the state was being ruled. Those who had supported the Sheikh were the peasantry. His support base remained with the peasantry because they'd been badly exploited in Maharaja's rule. They'd been even deprived of their ownership of land. He's the one who gave them back that ownership of land, and they remained ever grateful to him for that. But his support for the peasantry was not vocal. The peasantry was not politically so active. He was their leader. And with his removal, the group that came into authority in the society was unfortunately a group whose sympathies may lie with Pakistan, but whose interests lay with being in India. This was unfortunately the clash, the conflict inside the state, in the social basis of the state. Then, of course, I've talked to you about the widespread unemployment, the political instability, the fact that they felt that they had been deprived of their democratic rights, and they would never be given those democratic rights if they were part of India. Therefore, the need for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission at this stage, and of course something that I propagated and successfully, the right to information. Now, the state has had a panchayat election. The panchayat is an institution, as I've highlighted there. It is an institution of self-government. There's talk in Jammu and Kashmir of self-government. The panchayat is an institution of self-government of India. We did not fight shy of the concept of an institution of self-government. So these are, in my view, many of the remedies that will going to in fact not the many, but going to the root of the cause by giving the people the right to actually run their own government. Because from what I've tried to tell you is that they have felt deprived. What led to the insurgency also felt that from their being led to believe that they had nothing to do. Their government was only one which was there as a result of the patronage of the government of India, that they had nothing to do with it. So it is important to start, therefore, the grassroots, to then go on to a panchayat system which will then give to the people the feeling that they are in charge of their own lives. These are some of the strengths of their panchayat system. These are some of their weaknesses. The strength is that it extends right up to the judicial system, which does not exist everywhere in the rest of the country. There are hill development councils which have been established in Jammu and Kashmir, which are working very effectively. And these are working only in Kargil and in Leh. It is possible, and I believe that the interlocutors who are submitting their report today have recommended that you have similar councils in other regions of the state as well. So the people of that region can allow their regional aspirations to be asserted and taken into account in the formulation of policy by the central government of the state. The state already has district development boards which were established way back in the 70s, when I was in fact Deputy Commissioner of Poonch, which can easily be transformed into what is the District Planning Committee, which exists at present in all the districts in the country as a result of the 73rd and 74th Amendments. so that the planning is done taking into account the plans received from all the panchayats. And therefore, what is required by the people themselves by feeding into their panchayats is what constitutes the development plan, not what I or anybody at the higher levels feels that the people need. Unfortunately, that has been the bane of administration all over the country, that we've always felt that we know better than the people what they actually need, and then try to actually then implement programs accordingly, which have not had this effect. These are the strengths. They already have this. Unfortunately, they have no independent election commission, as all the other states have. They have no independent finance commission. So although the young Omar Abdullah has taken a great step in devolving a certain degree of part of the panchayats recently, this does not go far enough. It does not take the panchayat system up to the level of the region, which is what I have recommended. Therefore, what is proposed is a state-level autonomy as determined by the State Assembly with power to approve the state plan, a regional-level council in each of the regions, that is Jammu, Kashmir, Ladakh. Ladakh already has two. Whether they wish to have one overall council or whether they wish to continue with their two separate councils is for them, of course, to decide. Zilla councils at the district level with their district development boards, village councils, of course, is the panchayat itself, and Halqa Majlis, which is the Gram Sabha, which is absolutely necessary in feeding into this system the demands of the public themselves. The Gram Sabha has been described as a kind of legislature because it determines policy, the policy to be followed by the panchayat. And therefore, what I am proposing is, and what I have proposed is, and therefore steps have been taken in this direction, is that the people themselves should be made involved in all their governance activities, local governance activities, because it is local governance, obviously, that matters as far as the people are concerned. And if you are with me in my stand of the villagers, were in fact those who were the pillar behind the Sheikh's accession or support for accession to India, then this is one way of bringing them back into the stream of a feeling that they are the ones who run their own government. Also, this system will take care of the regional conflicts which have developed in the state in the last few years. You all know what happened in 2008 over the Amarnath Yatra, in which a conflict and a deep cleavage developed between the people of the state of Kashmir, of Jammu and Kashmir, that is Kashmir region and Jammu region. So that one was actually blockading the other, leading to demands that the roads to Pakistan-occupied Kashmir be opened so that the people can have access through that route. Now that is something that we do not wish should happen again. And therefore, each of the regions, each of the villages in each of the regions must be given this feeling that they are equal participants in governance. The other major issue that needs to be addressed, primary among them, I place this question of what happened to the Kashmiri Pandits in 1989-90. Now, through centuries, Kashmiri Pandits have been there. They have been persecuted in the past, but they've been persecuted by the rulers. The people never turned against them. The people against people. This began to happen in the 1980s. It came to its culmination by the end of that decade. And virtually the whole of the population left. About 3,700 families still remain, out of what was perhaps over 2 lakh. Now, this, I would say, is therefore a primary responsibility, and this needs to be addressed. There are over 100,000 widows and orphans, and this is according to a study done by the Kashmir University. This has led to some kind of a social breakdown, because many of these orphans then go into criminal activity. Many of them, of course, feed into fuel this kind of whatever subsists of the remains of the militancy. They are willing to actually commit acts of violence on payment of a certain sum, not out of commitment to any particular cause, but on payment of certain sums. The women have also developed into women who are available to people. You've had, of course, scandals of this nature which have come up in the past, in the recent past. You have these widows who have been forced to beg. Unfortunately, you have, and for the first time I came to know this, among the Kashmiri Pandits, which were always the more prosperous among the communities in J&K, people who do not have enough money to feed themselves and actually fed at the dargahs and the mosques. They've been reduced to being beggars. There are about 120 such Kashmiri Pandits. Many Kashmiri Pandits will not even concede this point, because obviously it is not something that is satisfying, but it is so. So these need to be addressed. Policies have so far not been, you have had policies for Kashmiri Pandits, but they have not gone far enough. And the Kashmiri Pandit community inside the state, these few who are left, all they demand is security and jobs for their children. Now, of course, government has taken decisions with regard to that, and I had the privilege of actually presiding over a Dasera celebration day before yesterday in Srinagar. It was at the Tourist Reception Center grounds. Very well attended. So I hope that there is a light at the end of that tunnel. Then relief disbursement for the people who suffered during that time. This includes Kashmiri Pandits as well as others. Here, there has been no effort at finding deserving recipients. Custodial killings have to go. We know what the most recent incident in Matsal, its repercussions last year, have been. It has to be conceded, and we have generals among us today, it has to be conceded by the army that there have been custodial killings, because if you don't concede it, you will not address it. You will be in a state of denial. Those cases in Matsal were a case of custodial killings. People employed, taken there in the belief that they would be given jobs, who were then killed, and rewards claimed for having killed those in custody, because they didn't belong to Kashmir, they belonged to Jammu. So people there may not have known them. There are missing persons. You will know about these graves which have been discovered. They've been described by the media as mass graves. They're not mass graves. Mass graves would be something that like you find in Srebrenica or somewhere where you have a huge pit, or Auschwitz or something, have a huge pit with a whole lot of bodies in it. That is a mass grave. These are simply graves. It's also important to understand that it is not the Muslim custom to mark graves. Now it has more recently become a custom among Muslims to mark their graves, but traditionally graves were not marked. In fact, the Wahhabis take great objection to the marking of graves. They even object to actually people paying reverence, revering the grave of the Prophet himself. When the Wahhabis first took power in Saudi Arabia, used to be beaten with a cane if you dared to approach the mosque of the Prophet, the grave of the Prophet. So this is not really a Muslim custom, and therefore because they are unmarked graves, you say that these are all custodial killings. I don't think you can jump to those conclusions, which media often tends to jump to. At the same time, there are large numbers of missing persons. And there are those who know who those missing persons are. An effort has to be made to trace them. If you do not have that, you will have no closure. Similarly, you have allegations of human rights violations like one that I inquired into, and I'm citing this because I had inquired into it in the allegation of mass rape in Kunan Poshpura in 1991. Now, in my view, there hadn't been a mass rape. There may have been some incidents of rape. But that report was edited and then published to say that there was no mass rape. Nevertheless, to this day, the women of that village cannot find husbands, because the young men in that area say that these women have all been raped, and therefore they are not fit to marry, or they're children of somebody who has been a rapist, they're children of a raped woman, so they cannot be married to any decent family. This still continues. I was surprised to hear that this is so. because when I was actually participating in one of the conferences, a young lady came up and said that, this is the situation to this day in that place, Kunanposhpura. And here, of course, I mentioned the J&K Human Rights Commission, which was set up in 1996, hasn't done much work in the recent past, but has now come up as a result of the pressure of the civilian population with this study, investigation into the allegation of mass killings or mass graves in Kupwara. Now, you had mentioned, why do I mention right to information here? Because it brings transparency and accountability in the working of every public authority. This is essential now in seeking to restore the trust of the public. It makes it the right of any citizen of India to request access to information and the corresponding duty of the government to meet the request, except any exempted information. All these matters that I mentioned to you, missing persons, people who have to be given compensation, the orphans and widows, all this can be something that can be addressed through the right to information law. And it is the duty of government to make all this information available, even if it is not asked for. Therefore, it is a responsibility on all sections of Kashmiri society, as it is on the rest of Indian society, to make the government accountable and answerable under this law. And as I said, I'm glad the state has now a law which is commensurate with the law in India. I mentioned the panchayats. The panchayats can function as a means of accessing this information, making this information available to people. You have scheme information, citizen surveys, fiscal information, devolution of functions to the panchayats, and over-the-counter, all this feeding into the panchayats. And the panchayats then feeds this into the citizens, who then feed back to the panchayat what the demands and the requests of the citizens are, which also includes better feedback and accountability, better convenience and efficiency, and citizens as individuals can also exercise their rights. Therefore, I think the importance of the fact that they have gone in for these panchayat elections, and the panchayats have been given, the state has devolved power on authority on the panchayats, is something that should not be understated, and we should recognize it. We should recognize its importance. So today, we have a popularly elected government. It's no doubt popularly elected since 2002. You have a young chief minister. You have an economic package from the prime minister. You have the interlocutors who, as I said, will be submitting their report today. It is not correct that the quiet dialogue has died. It is still, it's still continuing, but it is, as I said, quiet, and therefore it is not yet in the public. And there's a dialogue, continuing dialogue between India and Pakistan. But there are negatives. As I mentioned earlier, there are continuing custodial deaths. There's a lack of opportunity for youth, despite this huge economic package. There are no block development councils. No elections to that has been held at all. There are 2,700 Halka village panchayats, but there is no substantial achievement thus far, but hopefully there will be as these things continue to function. But the commissions, the Human Rights Commission, the Accountability Commission, the Information Commissions, these are all dysfunctional. They are not really delivering. Now, as I mentioned, the State Human Rights Commission, of course, has come up with something, but all these years there has been very little to write about. On the international side, there are now Chinese military personnel present in the state of Jammu and Kashmir in the north, in Gilgit. There is the uncertainty over the future of Afghanistan. You yourselves can assess that once the Americans leave Afghanistan, what could be the consequences as far as we are concerned, with a Chinese presence to the north. A China which is interested in ensuring that none of the desiderata or the detritus of the Afghan Mujahideen infiltrate into Xinjiang. Where would they encourage them to infiltrate? That, I fear, is a threat which we must take into account. Then, of course, there is a huge military presence in civilian areas. And this we can certainly discuss today, because I believe that there is certainly a way out. And the way out is not, you have had from the Chief Minister repeatedly, I think yesterday also he said, that withdrawal of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. If you have the presence of the military in civilian areas, you will also have to have the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. But there's a means out of that, there's a way out of that, by removing the presence of the military from civilian areas. Because, I don't know, and you have, of course, as I said, I'm speaking in front of highly experienced persons who will have more knowledge than I have on the subject. But as far as I can see, the deployment of the army, although it has been, of course, adjusted thereafter, the deployment of the army inside the valley has been frozen according to the requirements of 1948. Otherwise, how do you account for the need for the army in Shalteng, on the outskirts of Srinagar, for the army in Patan, halfway between Baramulla and Srinagar, for the army in Palhalan, which is also in that same area, and no military presence to the east, but all on the west, on the borders with Pakistan? Is there now even a possibility of an actual army marching into Kashmir from Pakistan? I don't think so. But anyway, these are questions that could be discussed, and we could talk further on this. Thank you. And now, of course, I've left it open for any discussion.